We have sound. Can you? What are you doing?
We're on camera.
Councillors, officers, we might make a start. Thank you. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the ordinary council meeting of Wyndham City Council this Tuesday, 3rd July 2018. And in the spirit of reconciliation, before we begin this meeting, I acknowledge the peoples of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which Wyndham is being built, and we pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. Could you all please stand for the opening prayer? We pray for guidance in the Council's decision making to achieve the best outcome for the people of Wyndham. Thank you. Please be seated. I would like to welcome members of the gallery, press, councillors and staff here tonight for this ordinary council meeting. Some of you may have seen a notice in the foyer, but for those of you who didn't, I would like to make you aware of the following. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the internet. The recording will be archived and made available on Council's website. Whilst all care has been taken to ensure that your privacy is maintained, please be aware that your presence may be recorded. Councillors, item 2 on the agenda is apologies and requests for leave. Madam CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As you'll see tonight, we don't have any apologies from councillors here this evening. However, Mr Mayor, we do have requests for leave. So there is a motion there, Mr Mayor, regarding a request for a leave of absence from Councillor Aaron Arn and also Councillor Walter Villagonzalo.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Josh Gilligan. Seconder, Councillor John Gibbons. Discussion, councillors? No discussion. I'll put it to vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Councillor McElhaney, you didn't vote?
Yes, I did.
I didn't see your hand go up. I apologise, and thank you very much. So the next item on the agenda is item 3. Declaration by councillors of disclosure of conflict of interest, conflicting personal interest in any item of the agenda? Councillors, does anyone have any conflicts on any items tonight? Councillor Marcus.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I will be declaring a conflict of interest on 2 items tonight. The first one being 6.2.1, which is the notice of intention to lease the Bridge Hotel. I have a commercial building 2 blocks away. The other item is 6.4.3, which is open space requirement on further subdivision of commercial, mixed use and industrially zoned land in established Werribee. So I am declaring an indirect conflict on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillors, item 4 is confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. The motion is that the minutes of the special council meeting held on 4th June 2018 as prepared and circulated be confirmed, and the ordinary council meeting held on Tuesday 5th June 2018 as prepared and circulated be confirmed. Can I have a mover, please? Councillors, Councillor John Gibbons. Seconder, please. Councillor Kim McElhaney. Discussion, councillors? All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 5, deputations and presentations. We have nil. Item 6, officers' reports. Excuse me. 6.1.1, response to petition 18/01, installation of CCTV cameras in Tarneit and Point Cook. The report commences on page 8. And the recommendations on page 8, there are no attachments. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Khan. Seconder, please. Councillor McElhaney. Discussion, councillors. Remembering, Councillor Khan, that we're acknowledging only. So, cool. Thank you. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 6.2, strategic reports. 6.2.1, notice of intention to lease. Councillor Marcus, please. I beg your pardon. So, 6.2.1, notice of intention to lease Bridge Hotel building, 197 Watton Street, Werribee. The report commences on page 11 with the recommendation on page 12, the nil attachments. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor John Gibbons. Seconder, please. Councillor Tony Hooper. Discussion, councillors. Councillor Gilligan, you're speaking.
I will speak for the motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much. And as indicated just then, I intend to vote in favour of this motion, but I do indeed wish to put on the public record my view in relation to the Bridge Hotel development, including the acquisition by council of this particular site. And one of the key concerns that I have had is making sure that we deliver value for ratepayers in relation to, if we hold and maintain this site, that we use it to its maximum ability. And whilst I still reserve some concerns around maximising ratepayers' monies on this particular site, it is important in my mind, and indeed the advice that has been given, that the capital growth that is expected of this development will ensure that in the future, should it be sold, that it will deliver the rate of return that ratepayers can rightfully expect, given the large quantity of money that has been invested in this particular asset. So I thought it was important to put that on the record, and indeed I have nothing further to add and look forward to seeing what responses we get back.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, only speakers against this motion? Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, my view is what we're trying to do now, we bought this site in thinking and rational behind words to having car parking. Now, this hotel came part as a package. So my view is the council is not in a business of having assets like this, which is a hotel, and lease it and then maintain a responsibility of ongoing maintenance or or it's just the Vestas, in my view, it's not a right decision to council to have a building like hotel and lease it to the 2020, which is, I'm a bit of a concern about that the business council want to get into the hotel and have the hotel ownership of it and then lease it to the public. If the people are interested, we can achieve similar outcome, sell the assets.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Councillor Barlow, quote your point of order, please.
The point of order, Mr Mayor, is that there's nothing in the recommendation, I'll give you the point in a moment, that the statements are that will or are likely to mislead or deceive people, is that there's nothing in the report that actually says that it's going to be a hotel. We're looking for an expression of interest, and that it is, or it was, the Bridge Hotel, but obviously there's nothing in here to say that it's going to be reactivated as a hotel. It could be used for any number of things.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow.
Bed and breakfast, or restaurants, or whatever.
Yep.
I
Thank
just
you.
bring that to your attention. Thank you.
He's right, Councillor Khan.
Well, I will withdraw my word as a hotel, but I'm sure that you're building like this, which if we lease it, allow the potential leasee to activate and obtain the same similar rights or run a similar business. The point here I'm making now, I personally believe, is a small asset. We better dismantle it, sell it to the XYZ, and use the money for the needs of the ratepayers deserve, rather than having assets like, which is called a site, which comes as a Bridge Hotel. And this is my point I'm making. I think that way council do not have any responsibility of the particular site. And that can be, I totally agree with Councillor Henry Barlow's view. Look, it's not a hotel, it could be anything, but I just believe, though, we were trying to facilitate the site for the car parking use to achieve the good outcome, and rather than this is just a part of that, package came, we should dismantle it and use the money for something else. I think we can get a good price for the site. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillors, any further speakers for the motion? Councillor Hooper?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am pleased to see this report come before us tonight, as it means that we are one step closer to seeing new life at an iconic Werribee landmark. If council supports the motion, it is a strategic one, as it means that we are able to ensure the retention of a building itself, which contributes greatly to the Werribee city centre streetscape, and also enables us to guide the type of development that we will see there. It's worth noting that the Bridge Hotel is steeped in history, a history that does have a heritage overlay protecting it, an overlay that tonight's report recognises and respects. The report states the Bridge Hotel is covered by a heritage overlay in the Wyndham planning scheme. Currently, the building is in a state of disrepair and needs substantial capital investment to ensure its successful revival. The EOI process has identified 3 strong proposals that would see the heritage building refurbished and used for economic and community benefit. As a council, we're working towards the development of a more vibrant and livable city centre that will be rejuvenated through capital site projects, including the Bridge Hotel. There are already a range of fantastic businesses operating in Werribee, and I see the rejuvenation of the Bridge Hotel as high quality food and beverage offering as a way of bringing more people to the area, which is a win for all businesses. We all know that a vibrant night economy is what helps the economic uplift, as well as increased livability, and I think this is a great project that will do that, and it preserves our history for years to come. I look forward to seeing a new tenant being appointed and this iconic property being restored to its former glory. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Councillors, any further speakers against the motion? Any further speakers for it? Councillor McElhaney.
I'd just like to quickly say I'm fully supportive of this motion, and that the decision to do a 2020 lease will ensure that we get the best tenants for this community asset. And as Councillor Hooper and Councillor Barlow has stated, this is an iconic part of the CBD in Werribee, and I look forward to getting a fantastic tenant in there. Thank you.
Any further discussion, councillors? Councillor Gibbons, even there, no, you're fine. Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. We'll wait for Councillor Marcus to come back. Councillors, item 6.2.2 on the agenda is Growing Suburbs Fund 2018-19. The report commences on page 15. With the recommendation on page 15, there are no attachments. Can I have a mover, please, councillors? Councillor Barlow, seconder. Councillor John Gibbons. Discussion, councillors? Councillor Barlow.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Very briefly, the Growing Suburbs Fund's been around now for about 3 years, at about $50 million per year. That's $150 million between the 79 councils in Victoria. And as it states on page 16 of the report, Wyndham has been fortunate enough to secure more than $14 million of that $150 million. So when you look at it, it's oh, look, I'm not that smart with numbers, but it's about 14%, 14.5% of the Victorian fund. So there's an awful lot of councils missing out. I don't know why you're laughing, Mr Mayor, but anyway.
It's all good.
It must have been my comment about I'm not very good at numbers, but anyway. So when you look at, Mr Mayor, that if one council can pick up almost 10% of 150 million, we've definitely, as people would say, we're batting above our weight when it comes to getting that amount of money, and I encourage the council officers to work diligently in applying for these 8 projects so that we can continue to provide great infrastructure for the people of Wyndham.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillors, are there any speakers against this motion? Any further speakers for it? Councillor McElhaney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to say we're batting above our average because we're prepared. We're prepared, the officers are prepared with our high priority projects. We're months ahead, and this is why we've got to be ready when these projects come about. We have to have all the paperwork and all the timelines ready for these projects. So the fact that we've got several or quite a few projects up says that we're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McElhaney. Councillors, any further discussion? Councillor Gilligan.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. I certainly echo the points made by Councillor McElhaney and in particular Councillor Barlow on what has been an incredible investment by the Victorian Government in this city. But what is most important about the list of projects that we've got in the pipeline here, as Councillor McElhaney pointed out, from a project management perspective, making sure we've got business cases and projects ready to roll off, is a number of these projects fall in areas without developer contributions, and really getting that blend in place about how we apply for grant funding for those more established areas of our city, and making sure that we've got the asset renewal underway, whether you take into account the Grange redevelopment, of course Central Park, even the Glendevon project, a project that I know has been a key passion for Iramu councillors, as well as of course Councillor Shaw in that space. We can clearly see these projects are well targeted, well structured, and that is why we do bat above our weight in terms of getting that funding. And I look forward, particularly when it comes to the youth street surfer bus, an important investment in light of the events earlier this year, about making sure that we have assets as well as our service delivery models for young people in this city as best as we can possibly make them. And that is why we have prioritised that particular project. And I certainly hope the Minister ticks off on that, given the significant demand here in this city because of the size of our growing youth population. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, any further speakers? Councillor Marcus.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I've read this with interest, and it's great to think that the state government is looking nicely upon us and giving us funding. It is essential that we do have the project shovel ready so that as soon as the grants come out, we can apply. And I just hope they look favourably on the youth street surfer bus, because we're looking at the full One, not terribly keen on Glendevon because it is government property, and there's been a bit of a come back to us on the people that we shouldn't be funding something that's owned by the federal government. But I do support this, thank you, or the state government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillors, any further discussion? Councillor Hooper.
As a point of clarification to the officers, I'm not trying to curb the enthusiasm, and we've had a great amount of money come through, but my understanding is the Growth Suburbs Fund only applies to 6 councils. So although we're getting a fair bit of investment, when you apply to those 6 councils, we're actually punching below our weight, not above it. Can I have a clarification on that, please?
It's actually 10 councils.
So,
Madam CEO.
through you, Mr Mayor, if I can just clarify, it does actually apply to the Interface Councils group. No, there are actually a larger number that relates
10.
to. The 6 specifically growth, but it is actually the entire Interface Councils group. And to be quite frank, Mr Mayor, I'm sorry, I can't think of the exact number off the top of my head, but it's certainly more than 6. No, it's not 79, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barlow was correct.
Yes, I think that was a slip of the tongue. Carry on, Councillor Hooper. Are you done? Thank you very much. So, councillors, any further discussion? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would just like to make one comment around Glendevon, that at this time there isn't any contribution currently proposed from a council contribution other than officer time. So we're actually asking for the full $870,000 actually from the state government. So I don't think there's anyone that couldn't argue that that site has been vacant a very long time, that something needs to be done with it, and in that local community area, I think reactivating that site is going to be very important. So fully support the ask that we're putting forward there. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Any further speakers, councillors? Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a really good mix of what we're asking for, that funding. Now, great to see here the Wyndham Solar City. So we're requesting now, we need some money for installation for the solar panels on the community buildings, and as well as battery storage. So that's really a spread out, and important to see the Wyndham become a solar city. So I think it's really good forward thinking, and making city thinking of the carbon less and become sustainable city, and people will, another council can also learn from us how we advocating for the solar city as being a solar.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillors, any further discussion? No further discussion. I'll put it to vote. Councillor Bardo, as there was no one speaking against, no right to reply. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 6.3, at policy advocacy, there is nil. 6.4, strategic and town planning. Wyndham North, 6.4.1, Wyndham North Development Contribution Plan Project Implementation Program. The report commences on page 19 with a recommendation on page 20. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Barlow, seconder. Councillor Gilligan. Discussion, councillors? No discussion.
So very brief.
Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I just want to highlight that one of the key aspects of this is, of course, the delivery and further investment on Leakes Road. And that's particularly exciting when we take into the context the importance of Davis Road train station, and ensuring that we have the correct arterial layout to get people from A to B, but also ensuring that the Victorian government, and indeed the federal government has not contributed a single cent out of the $75 billion infrastructure fund that we all pay for. But it's really clear and obvious that we are paying our fair share, and it's time that the feds stump up funds to make sure that they deliver Davis Road when we complete the Leakes Road portion of this arterial network. So I just thought it was important to add that in the context of this DCP plan that we're voting on tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, no further discussion. I put it to vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. 6.4.2, Wyndham West Development Contributions Plan Project Implementation Program. The report commences on page 29 with a recommendation on page 29. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Gilligan. Seconder, Councillor Khan. I saw your hand go up, so discussion, councillors? No discussion, I put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against, the motion is carried. Item 6.4.3, Councillor Marcus, you've indicated. Councillors, item 6.4.3, open space requirement for further subdivision of commercial, mixed use and industrial zoned land in established Wyndham. The report commences on page 40 with a recommendation on page 42, attachments page 51 to 87. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Shaw, and a seconder. Councillor Hooper.
Photo finish.
He never looks over here.
I've
got to get in.
No, it's all good. Discussion, councillors. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am pleased to support this recommendation. I believe that this provision will provide good outcomes, not just for new subdivisions, but also in our established areas. Our open space strategy highlights where we need to provide open space now and for the future, and these contributions will assist us in delivering what we have identified. This can be particularly challenging in our established areas, but the open space contributions received from future subdivisions in these areas will go towards either new open space or the enhancement of existing parks and reserves in the locality from which the contribution is collected. This is a good outcome. I've been a passionate supporter of upgrading our existing neighbourhood parks, and I think it's important that developers assist in the provisions of these important community assets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillors, any further discussion? I haven't finished. Any further discussion? Against? Any further discussion for? Councillor Hooper. Yeah, I saw your hand go up close. Yeah, it's okay.
I am supporting the recommendation before us tonight. I believe that this is a step in the right direction in terms of appropriate open space being provided for future developments in Wyndham. In September 2017, it was noted back then the demand for commercial and industrial development in Wyndham is lower than the demand for residential development. It was at this time Council approved the selection of 5% open space contribution from residential subdivisions in Wyndham's established areas, with the view to revisit other subdivision types. As noted in the report before us tonight, sensitivity testing has been carried out to ensure that we are not actually deterring commercial and industrial investment in implementing this change. And I'm satisfied that we are striking the right balance. As the report spells out, the assessment by SGC Economics and Planning proposes to introduce an open space requirements as the maximum allowable under the Subdivision Act in the established urban area of Wyndham and 2% in the Laverton North Industrial Node. It's really important to keep in mind that this only applies to future subdivisions and is in place to ensure that access to sufficient open space is provided for residents, businesses and visitors. As detailed in the report, the need for open space requirements was discussed in Stupak Hurst Hobson's Bay City Council. Specifically, the objective is not to tax development, but to provide councils with a source of land or funds to help carry out legitimate responsibility. As communities evolve, it is incumbent on councils to maintain, improve, upgrade and add to public open space facilities as a means of meeting the social needs and changing demands for passive and active open space. This is really about good planning and enables council to more effectively acquire, develop and manage open space. And I'm pleased to support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Councillors, any further discussion? Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And from my perspective, we often talk about a mining boom, and in some respects, this city is exactly that. The commercial and industrial side benefit greatly from the investment overall in this city when it comes to population growth, to the overall domestic economic output that it delivers. And making sure that they pay their fair share is important, because one of the, I guess, consequences of the significant densification of this city is the loss of backyards. And we discussed that. I certainly raised that in the place-based strategy that was debated and discussed at the last OCM, which very much highlighted in Chafey Ward, in Tarneet, it is facing one of the most dense parts of our city in terms of population in the locality. And it is important to consider that when we are taking away more and more space in our backyards and giving it to other developments by virtue of requiring commercial and industrial, in the same way residential will now pay as part of an open space requirement, we're making sure the balance exists for commercial and industrial. And I know that this money will go into an important investment in making sure that our parks and playgrounds continue to be used as we see the smaller and smaller land blocks of housing development in this city. So this is a terrific policy. It's one that has been adopted by other councils. We can't say we're leading the way necessarily on this one, which is a rare thing to say, but nevertheless, it's good to see us jump on board in what is a very well thought out policy position. And I certainly look forward to seeing it continue. And I also look forward to seeing the interesting case of Monash City Council around this, particularly with the case there down in Chadstone. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes in the context of this concept. But nevertheless, I am adamantly in favour of it, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Gillian. Councillors, any further discussion? Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I have to say that, look, this is one of those things you have to understand straightforward what we're trying to do. And my understanding is, as Councillor Josh Gilligan has said, that, you know, this city's benefits are great for the development, and we are inviting a lot of investors to come to make a good investment, whether it is a mixed-use zone or industrial zone. Now, this is literally, we're trying to say, let's put a 5% levy on established areas we already have established in future subdivisions. I get that, but I also don't like to see that now Wyndham City Council send a message to the community saying that we are anti-development council because we're putting extra 5%, even though I love to collect their share contribution to make sure we can benefit the other part of the needs, which is community needs. But I just like to see that in a present climate where now things are changing, the bank's tight, it should not send a message we are looking extra 5% for collections in the name of open space. However, though, we have a good lot of reserve, lot of parks there, but collecting extra 5%, I just, in particular, in my view, I think we're just giving extra burden. And what developer will do will pass the extra 5% to the potential buyers, and that will slow down the growth of the city.
Khan, are you speaking against this motion or for it?
Speaking against the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Against?
That's right.
Councillor Khan, this is the second time that I've asked in the chamber, are there any further speakers against, and you have not indicated. So please, in future, if you don't do that, I will stop you from talking.
Mr. Mayor, you said any further discussion? You didn't say
Councillor
for
Khan,
or against.
I asked for speakers for and against, you indicated neither.
Mr. Chair, do you want me to speak or not?
Councillor Khan, I'm indulging you to speak.
Thank you.
I tell you from now on, if you do not indicate, I will not allow you to speak. So please continue.
I think I understand that. You're saying second time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, reminding me.
I'll say it a third time if I have to.
No problems. Relax. Okay, so I view that I think it's extra better than 5% would be a negative message. Therefore, I would not be supporting it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, any further discussion?
I'd like to say something.
Councillor Shaw, you've got right of reply, seeing eventually we had someone speak against it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just following on from those comments, I don't think there's anyone in this city that would think that a as a municipality or as a council that would be anti-development. I actually think as a council, we're actually very supportive of development, and we've talked about a number of our own developments in this chamber. So I suppose that comment does surprise me just a little bit, but thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really do support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillors, all those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Can we have Councillor Marcus back in the chamber, please? Councillors, the next item on the agenda is 6.4.4, residential subdivision, Riverwalk Estate, stages 24 to 26, permit area 8. The report commences on page 88 with recommendation on page 89, attachments 124 to 133. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Marcus. A seconder, please. Councillor Khan. Discussion, councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you know, I will be supporting the officer's recommendation, as I believe the plan put forward provides the opportunity, thank you, for us to work with Development Victoria to achieve the best possible outcome in terms of the provision of new trees and access to a much needed new school, which they are begging for out there at Riverwalk. Whilst I believe the removal of the trees is not ideal, and as that's in my portfolio, I'd never ever want to see trees removed, but it is required to provide a major access point to the site. So we either want 2 heritage trees or we want an intersection, and people complained about getting the lights put into the other intersection. So I think really and truly the people would probably be happy to get the intersection in for Alfred Road. Our environmental portfolio has been briefed by Development Victoria, and I am satisfied that the new boulevard planting will offset the removal of trees to date and will provide an entrance that we can be proud of. At the moment, it's the worst entrance to our city. And I believe if we can work with Development Victoria to get what they're promising, which is a beautiful boulevard of planting, and we've also put forward to them that we would love to have beautiful gardens, as you get when you drive into Ballarat. And there are people that live in Wesley Gardens and also Riverwalk who want to work with us to make sure that this happens. Officers have imposed a significant number of conditions to this permit, and it's 17 pages. I, in my 12 years on this council, have never ever seen so many recommendations put on a development. And I believe that every attempt has been made to ensure that amenity issues are addressed. The loss of heritage trees is not something I support at all, and I have spoken about this many times to many of the people here in this city. But unfortunately, this time I would forego just 2 of them to make sure of that intersection, as I said before. Unfortunately, however, these trees are not always native, and many of the ones that have already been cut down are sugar gums. If you know what sugar gums are, they are native to South Australia, so Riverwalk do not have to have a permit to remove these trees. And when they came into our environmental portfolio, we asked them about the trees on the subdivision itself. And yes, some of those will have to go, but again, they're all sugar gum. But there are heritage trees in that reserve. And what Riverwalk are doing is they are leaving the heritage trees in the park. So those heritage trees will not go. It would be inappropriate and outside our remit as the responsible planning authority to refuse a permit based on these non-planning issues. I believe they have worked really hard to make sure that this development will be one of the top ones here in this city. And they are going to plant many, many more trees within that subdivision to make up for the trees that they are taking out. They have done a wonderful job with the landscaping, I believe, and I think it will be a showcase. If we can work with them to get the beautiful boulevard of trees and the gardens coming in to Wyndham, I think we will have achieved a lot. There are many residents who have purchased land in Riverwalk development with the expectation that a new school would be coming, and they ring often to say that this is one area that they're falling. And they were promised shops and a whole lot of things, but they've run into a few troubles and that's gone by the ways. But I believe it would be irresponsible of us to cause the delay in not going ahead with Riverwalk and being able to provide schools for the children in this area. The only thing that I could say about them is that what I hear is that the internet service out there is not good, so that's one thing that they will have to address. But apart from that, I'm very happy with this report. I think it's a very good report. I think the recommendations listed out on the 17 pages explain absolutely everything about what Riverwalk want to do out there. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus, and you did it in 4 minutes.
Oh, that's good, isn't it?
Yes. Councillors, any speakers against the motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I'm voting against the recommendation tonight, and Mr Mayor, in doing so, I'd also like to foreshadow an alternative motion that the proposal is not consistent with urban environment, the proposal is not consistent with heritage, the proposal is not consistent with urban landscape, and the proposal is not consistent with decision guidelines.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw, and should it fail, you'll have the opportunity to put that forward.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I support some of the recommendation that council officers have put forward in relation to this item, in particular the inclusion of a Tree Avenue master plan for Geelong Princess Highway and a Tree Avenue identification with a commemorative plaque. I am not satisfied that the proposed subdivision provides the best outcome for our community. Specifically, I believe that the subdivision as proposed will result in a significant loss of amenity for this important gateway to our city. I think it's important to reiterate that council does not own nor has ever owned the land on which Riverwalk is being developed. The issue of the trees on this site has been interesting and frustrating, to say the least. Interesting because it has been a baptism of fire into state and local government planning schemes and issues. Frustrating because I was never part of any decision to give a permit for this development, but this council is now wearing the repercussions of state and local government decisions from at least 10 years ago. What has happened to the local amenity and natural environment has caused much angst to many residents. In particular, I am deeply concerned about the loss of heritage trees from the site. The tree mentioned in this report, a sugar gum, is a South Australian tree, still an Australian tree, but it can be removed without a permit because it is non-native to Victoria. In fact, it has already been removed because Development Victoria decided to remove it before this permit was heard in the chamber tonight. I must say that I'm surprised that a better outcome could not be achieved for this development, especially given that Development Victoria, a state government entity, is the developer for this site. I'm also surprised that the proposal has been supported by Vic Roads, given that the trees are on Vic Roads land and the Calder Memorial was planted in recognition of the first chairman of the Country Roads Board. I understand that the subdivision includes a future school site. However, I don't believe that our community should have to trade off the retention of trees to enable access to a future school. We have to aim for a better environmental outcome that recognises the importance of urban amenity and, of course, our history. And let's be frank, replanting in different areas doesn't replace what has been lost. As a long-term resident of this city, I find it heartbreaking to see what has happened to our once lovely tree-lined entrance into our city. I believe that the subdivision should have greater regard for the landscape character of this area, and as a council, we should be setting a higher benchmark for our community. And finally, Mr Mayor, permit conditions imposed by us do not necessarily mean that they will be upheld if this matter actually went to VCAT. Bridge Street is a very good example of that. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillors, any speakers for the motion? Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking for the motion. I think it's a great example of how the planning department, and particularly thank you for the director of the city operations, Steve Thorpe, have looked up that application and I think worked really hard to see that issue the permit with a number of conditions. I think it's a great way of looking that, let's resolve the problem and allow the permit to be issued to the applicant, otherwise we'll be hanging around and we might miss out that opportunities the developers offer for the residents. And I'm glad to see that it's have a condition on it. The lot shouldn't be less than 300. It's good to see that, council is advocating where they're putting conditions, lot should not be less than 300 square metre, which is great because we know that now the neighbourhood councils and even some of those in Wyndham, I hate to see that lots going smaller and smaller and becoming matchboxes. So I think it's a great way, but I do have to say that, it's got a lot of condition attached to it. And some of the conditions, as mentioned here, public transport with road conditions is all there is a good way of tidying up issuing the permit rather than delaying or refusing it, and they might exercise their right to go on weekend. So it's a great example of how the City Council deal with a complex permit like River Walk. So I would be happy to support that proposal. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillor, any further speakers against the motion? Any further speakers for it? Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an interesting one. I remember reading this over the weekend, and 17 pages of conditions is pretty big, probably one of the biggest ones I've read. And I know there's been a lot of community angst about the loss of trees and the direction that all this is going. And I think Councillor Shaw mentioned quite clearly that all of these decisions were made a decade ago. And that's the legacy of what happens over a period of time. What surprised me is the number of pages that talk about, and I take on board what Councillor Shaw said and what Councillor Marcus has said, but there's a number of pages talking about works affecting vegetation, tree management plan, tree avenue master plan, tree avenue identification, landscape subdivision conditions, general landscaping, and most of these are all preempted by, for example, the landscape plans are required to be submitted to and approved by council's landscape subdivisions, so we have a say. There's a tree avenue master plan unless approved otherwise in writing by the responsible authority, which is us, and unless council has completed similar work on a tree boulevard for the Geelong Road Princess Highway prior to the statement of compliance, so we get to have a say in that. So there seems to be quite a bit of that, but the thing that, and I know we run many strategies and advocacies for schools, on page 122 it states quite clearly also that if we do vote against this, and it's everybody's prerogative to vote whichever way they like, while the subdivision does not include the school site itself, the proposal is effectively delivering the school site by including the roads immediately around the site for access and services. And we can only hope that part of our advocacy plan with this subdivision going ahead, that we will also advocate quite strongly, because the school, especially a primary school with all the young families moving into the area, is going to be critical, and it will probably move up our list of advocacy, because obviously it's quite clearly needed. So I take on board all the comments I've heard, but I just don't see how I couldn't vote except for the recommendation as it sits.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Any further speakers? Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I just wanted to clarify. I'm speaking against this, by the way.
Against?
I
did ask before if anyone's wanted to speak against.
I know. Well, it's good to come up a couple of times now. I just want to clarify. My understanding is there's no guarantee we're going to get a school connected to this development if we approve it tonight. It could be 10 years down the track, it could be 20 years down the track.
Point of order, how is that relevant to the...
Well, it's been brought in...
Can I, hang on a sec.
Point of order on a question of...
So can you quote, I believe it's Councillor Gilligan.
Which one do I want?
That'll do. Specific facts are incorrect. Councillor Hooper is referring to a school that is actually not part of the subdivision motion. Whilst it refers to it in the motion, it actually does not refer to it in terms of the recommendation.
And we don't know how long it's going to be, so he is correct, Councillor Hooper.
Actually, I don't believe it is. There are a number of...
Councillor Hooper, if you disagree with my decision, you may certainly have the opportunity by now to move a motion of dissent in the decision. So either do that or let's move on.
Well, let's move on then. The roads connected to the school have been brought up a number of times during this discussion, and we do not know where those roads are. That could be a road to nowhere for 10, 20 or 30 years from now. And we should divorce such decisions from the
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Once again, it does clearly highlight what the names of the roads are and where they are. So if you wish to look at the map, you'll get the answer to your question.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan, and it's correct again, Councillor Hooper. So can we move on, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Now, councillors, any further speakers for the motion? Hopefully there are definitely no more against, because I think that's probably the fourth time now that I've asked, but we'll deal with that at another stage. So, Councillor Marcus, most certainly you have the right of reply, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I said in my report, I don't believe that what is said that the proposal is not consistent with the urban environment. I believe it is. I think they've done a really good job on this. And when the officers came in from Development Victoria to speak to the members of the Environment Committee, they were very happy and said that they would work with us and, you know, to work with us to make sure that we were happy with the boulevard of trees. So I would like to make sure and tell councillors that I'm quite sure we can take them at their word. Going back now, the land was owned by the Board of Works. They also listened to us when there was an 80-year-old gum out on the resident that the manager of the Board of Works lived on. That tree was saved. They have moved that intersection slightly, so that proves that they are listening to us. I will go back to the trees, the sugar gums. They are Indigenous to South Australia, and they are cutting them down in Truganina. They are cutting them down in Manor Lake, and they do not have to have a permit to remove the trees, the sugar gum trees. Sadly, that's in the planning permit, so there is nothing much we can do about that. I believe this is a great development. You only have to go out there and you see the beautiful parks that they've got out there, and I believe they will continue to work with this council to make sure that we get this entrance to this city that we are working with them to get, and I have every faith that they will do that. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillors, all those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 6.4.5, WIP 10296/17, the construction of 2 double-storey dwellings on each of Lot 8, 9 and 10 Cowan Park Way, Point Cook. The report commences on page 134. The recommendation is on page 135, attachments 161 to 170. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Khan, seconder. Councillor Gilligan. Discussion, councillors? No discussion. Councillor McElhaney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just hold on. One of the tasks that we are as elected members is to make decisions as a responsible authority. In recent years, we've opened up to the public to publicly speak to us about the objections in town planning forums and to listen to individuals as to the grounds to which we should refuse applications. And on the 18th of June 2018, we had such one of those meetings, and I thank the residents for coming out on a freezing cold night to talk personally why this application should be objected to. Our tasks are never easy, and when we do see these applications come up, we do take them as extremely serious. Only last year, and I'd like to bring up a case that came before us previously, and that was to do with 1 Queen's Court. And many of the residents had lived in those houses for over 60 years. The application saw the construction of 11 double-storey buildings at this site, or dwellings at this site. This site was 2,848 metres square in area. And thank you, Councillor Gilligan. And the dwellings themselves are 258 metres square. Council refused the application of these 11 units at an OCM meeting based on neighbourhood character, amenity impact, poor integration with street access and vehicle movement concerns, and concerns with the waste collection at the Court Bowl. The application went to VCAT, and amazingly, the VCAT overturned our decision and instructed Council to grant the permit.
Extraordinary.
The cost to ratepayers for a VCAT decision was in the vicinity of $20,000 plus, and it depends, and that happens with all our, when we go, if we lose, that's what it costs the ratepayer. The tribunal was satisfied that the development did satisfy all the requirements of above.
1 minute, Councillor McElhaney.
So now I get on to the application before us. There are 6 dwellings proposed to be developed on the combined site area of 1632 metres square. Lots 8, 9 and 10. This is 272 metres square area per dwelling. The application meets the requirements of clause 55 assessment. The provisions of the providing a visitor car space per 5 dwellings in clause 5206 has not been met in this case. However, it should be noted that if this application had submitted 3 separate planning applications to construct 2 dwellings on each, the requirements for a visitor car space would not have been required. The application has been assessed against the general residential zone, and it is considered consistent with the relevant provisions of the general residential zone.
Sum up, Councillor McElhaney, please.
The application has been assessed against state planning framework, consistent with the planning scheme for the reasons outlined on page 145. The officer's report also outlined details and of all the resident concerns and the amended conditions on which this application will be granted. In light of the above, unfortunately, I don't believe that we have enough shortfalls in this proposal to refuse this application, Mr Mayor, and I will be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor McElhaney. Councillors, any further discussion? Now, against? Thank you. How do I know that? Councillor Hooper.
Look, I'd like to also foreshadow a alternative motion to this.
Should this motion be lost?
Should this motion be lost? This application proposes to construct 2 double-storey dwellings on each allotment within an established area within the window. Council's policies are generally supportive of this type of development in the right context. However, it is paramount that developments are designed appropriately and that council gives careful consideration to the amenity impacts on the surrounding neighbourhood, the nearby roads, and the ease and safety which vehicles, especially emergency vehicles, can gain access to this site is considered insufficient and inadequate as far as I'm concerned. The proposed development will detrimentally impact on the amenity of the surrounding neighbourhood as the traffic impacts will be accumulated as the proposed development is located within a cul-de-sac at the end of Cowland Parkway. Pedestrian safety, lack of footpaths in particular, is also a concern. It is considered that the proposed development located at the end of the cul-de-sac will result in high volume of traffic entering and exiting in the street at one location. Now, the Queen's Court decision at VCAT was in respect to a space where adjacent units already existed. There is no such site within this immediate area. So the application before us tonight is needed with a fresh set of eyes. The proposed construction fails to meet the decision guidelines of the general residential zone and clause 65 of the Wyndham.
1 minute, Councillor Hooper.
And would not result in orderly planning of the area for the reasons I have outlined.
Oh, get another 60 seconds. All good though. Councillors, any further speakers for the motion?
just want to, sorry if I can.
For the motion, yes?
Yes, I just want to certainly echo Councillor McElhinney's point, particularly in relation to Queen's Court. We're increasingly seeing situations such as this. We voted not too long ago on a 13 dwelling double-storey development on a land size not too much bigger than this one. Again, in the context of the growth of our city and in the context of the neighbourhood character strategy, we're going to increasingly see this issue, and it really does come down to whether or not we accept the Victorian planning scheme the way it is. And in this instance, in relation to this particular resolution, it is completely consistent with it, and therefore I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Any further speakers against the motion? Any further speakers for it? Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Last Friday, I went to a seminar at VCAT with about 40 other councillors and mayors from around Victoria, and it was quite interesting, probably very knowledgeable. I came away with far more knowledge after 3 hours there, talking about our obligations, council's obligations as being the statutory authority in planning issues, the planning authority. And one of the things that came out, and it was interesting that a councillor who had been on council for 6 years now, asked the question, does a local planning point in the local planning guidelines for the council, can it be overruled by the state planning guidelines?
Mr Mayor, point of order.
Councillor Khan, can you quote your point of order, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Make it good in touch.
Councillor Councillor Henry Barlow is not speaking to the motion.
We're talking about planning.
I think we're talking about planning, Councillor Khan, and is actually...
Yes, and I said I'm speaking for it.
Finished with my...
I'm allowed to... Oh, sorry.
So he's speaking actually for the motion. He's mentioning, sorry, Councillor Barlow is mentioning the VCAT. I think it's quite relevant, so not accepted. Continue, Councillor Barlow.
Does my 3 minutes stay again?
No, it doesn't. 1 minute and 5 seconds.
Okay, so this I'll make it very quick. And it was made quite clear that the state planning provisions can overrule the local government planning rules as put in. And it's interesting that that in this particular case, on page 145, that Councillor McElhinney so put it very well in that succinctly, state planning policy framework and the local planning policy framework are in sync. And it's in our own documents to say that as the planning authority, we must encourage a diversity of housing. I live on a block that's much smaller than this of three townhouses, all meeting the relevant guidelines from the state and our local authority. So people do want to live, whether they start off as a young couple in a small place or they move into a smaller place when they get older and they become empty nesters. You know, there's always a requirement for a variety. And this provides variety. And I take on board what Councillor McElhinney said, and she's totally right. If the developer, and it would have taken our council officers longer to work their way through this, if they'd have come in site by site, we wouldn't be here now, because you are allowed to put two dwellings on the one site according to the local rules. So really, I don't think there's any argument over this, that this development meets all the criteria, and if we pass this tonight, we're going to save the ratepayers a bucket load of money.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillors, any further discussion? Councillor Khan, seeing there was a speaker against, you have right of reply.
I think I have to agree with what other councillors have said, that I think it's such sort of hard thing to make decisions where, you know, both parties put forward, and Councillor Henry Barlow have said that, you know, it's a difficult one. So I have to say that, you know, I would have to sort of follow the guidelines of the officers and see what other fellow councillors have to do.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Now, councillors, please indicate clearly. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. The next item on the agenda is 6.5, 6.5.1, Old Geelong Road Special Charge Scheme. The report commences on page 171 with a recommendation on page 172, attachments 178 to 179. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Gibbons, seconder. Councillor, sorry, I was looking that way. Councillor Hooper. Discussion, councillors. Thank you, councillor. And I don't need to ask you if you're speaking for it, because you are.
You or?
No, Councillor Gilligan. I said Gilligan.
Oh, sorry.
Did you put your hand up, Councillor Gibbons? I do beg your pardon. As you moved it, you do have the right to speak first. I'm sorry, I didn't see it. My apologies, Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Locals will realise that this is has been a bit of a thorn in our side for some time. It'll take steps we're taking to relieve the problems of dust on cars opposite on the opposite side of Old Geelong Road, and I think it's a good idea that we do this, and it's long overdue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gibbons. Councillors, any speakers against this motion? None. Any further speakers for it? Councillor Gilligan.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I am also in favour of this resolution, and I agree with Councillor Gibbons that this has been a long time coming. And I've spoken tonight about paying our fair share, and we're doing exactly that, making sure that ratepayers pay a proportional amount in terms of the proposed council contribution, plus, of course, Vic Road's contribution, and we obviously expect them to come to the table and to deliver on that contribution. Should they not, it would be a damning indictment on them. This has been an issue for some years, and something that I have received correspondence, as I'm sure Councillor Gibbons has, and indeed all Chafey Ward councillors, even though it does reside, I know Councillor McElhinney wants to jump in, it is in Harrison Ward, and then there are councillors that would contend that it's in theirs, and it depends on
heavy lifting.
And to be fair, Mr. Mayor, after the redistribution of council wards over the years and this issue being there just as long, we've all had our fair share of ward representation on the issue. This is something that really is a legacy item that we're going to deliver in this term of council, and we should be proud of that. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, are there any speakers against this motion? Any further speakers for it? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be supporting tonight's recommendation, as I am keen to see the outcome of the consultation process with businesses. Like most residents, I've witnessed firsthand the lack of traffic management, the safety concerns and the dusty and unsightly conditions that are currently experienced at this site. There is no doubt the service road is needed. However, I am somewhat concerned about the impost of a special charge scheme on businesses. I think this is something that we can explore more once we have all the information. I'm also keen to ensure that the Vic Roads contribution is confirmed, as I don't believe that this is something that should be left to council or local businesses to fund. Given that this item is about progressing to the next stage, where we will understand more about the cost and the detailed feedback from businesses, I'm happy to support the recommendation so that I will be in a position to make a more informed decision in the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillors, any further speakers for the motion? Councillor McElhinney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also will be supporting the recommendation. It is long overdue. It's a disaster at present, and local businesses are suffering. We do get regular emails from all the local businesses around there to do with mud, dust, the health and safety of their, particularly the health of their residents with the staff, I should say, the health of their staff with the dust that's flying up, and access. Ironically, only Saturday, I was nearly taken out by a truck right in the vicinity of that named area, and it's simply the way the traffic management is at the moment. So I look forward to having some rectification of that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McElhaney. Any further speakers? Councillor Marcus. Four, yes. Are we doing fours now?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This recommendation is to move forward, and we have a long, long way to go because I have been involved in 4 separate rates. And as you can see on page 175, the support for construction, yes, is 14, which is 45%, but agreed to contribute is 0. So we do have a long way to go. Separate rates, trying to get them up is not easy because nobody really wants to pay. But what we have to make sure that Vic Roads will pay their fair share. And I have spoken to Director Mr Thorpe today, and he's outlined some of my questions, which we can't discuss tonight because they will come when we move forward on this recommendation tonight, to go back out and to speak to all of the business people that will be concerned. Yes, there is, and the other point, there's some of them that own much of that strip, so this is going to be a very difficult part for us to move forward on, because I think one business owns 7 lots and it would be very large, and I'll be interested to see the next part on how the money will be divvied up between each of the landlords. But going forward, I think it's good. We have to look to all business people down that way. Some can't stand the dust any longer, and you know, unfortunately there's dust coming off that gravel road. It's just like a little rural road at the moment, but we have to also consider the business people that might be impacted with the cost put forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillors, any further speakers for it? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Oh, I know, we've already gone through the againsts.
Look, I'll be supporting the progression of work in relation to the special charge scheme to Old Geelong Road, as I really do believe that the service road is needed. I would however, like to stress that my support by Councillor Shaw and others for this proposal is dependent on the contribution from Brick Roads being forthcoming to contribute to the cost of their section of the carriageway. I think that anyone who has driven on this section of road would see that the work needs to be done, both from a safety and amenity perspectives. Issues have been raised by businesses in this area for a long time, and I'm pleased that Council has taken the lead in working towards an actual solution. In support of this solution, the report states, whilst it may be thought the road should be 100% funded by Council, initial construction or upgrades from gravel or unsealed roads to a fully constructed road in situations such as this normally occurs through a beneficiary pays system. And a great example is new developments where the developer is required to construct roads on behalf of the future property owner, and the cost of that work is factored into that land purchase price. Whilst I appreciate that businesses may not want to contribute to the cost of a service road, it is noted that the work will provide distinct and special benefits to neighbouring properties such as reliant on it for access, including improved and safer access for customers and deliveries, reduced mud and dust nuisance, and improved roadside drainage, ease of maintenance, and general amenity. These special benefits are additional to those enjoyed by properties not reliant on the proposed service road for access, which is why a special charge scheme is appropriate in this instance. I look forward to seeing the outcome of the consultation process. Thank you.
You beat me. I was about to say 1 minute left. Yeah, I know. Councillors, any further discussion? No further discussion. I put it to vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. 6.5.2 Green Living Series 2018 update. The report commences on page 180. Recommendations on page 181 with the attachments, page 188 to 192. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Khan, and the second I'll take as Councillor Marcus. Discussion. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I think this is one of the great programs Council runs in the month, started from February to goes all the way to the April. And it's been started in 2014 with the 10 events, and now it has grown up to 38. So you can see how big progress has been done, obviously. And popularity of this program is being just not a few hundreds, up to the people have participated, at least 2,000, just reported, but there's a lot of people viewing that program through the Facebook, and Facebook being a quite strong mechanism to promote green living. We take it proud. Also, the programs runs a series and events, including the pop-up recycling day, family travel nights, and some other mechanisms. So this program has been increased and has been benefited to the city. And I think the Environment and Sustainability Portfolio holder, Councillor Heather Marcus, has been doing great work along with the Director Peter McNaught, working hard to make sure that we are actually promoting the Green Living series. I look forward to see the numbers as grown now, and I'm sure that, you know, the Facebook has been a good promotions. There could be other mechanism can be explored to increase the numbers, but it's a great work by Council as running the Green Living series 2018.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillors, any speakers against this motion? Any speakers for it? Councillor Marcus.
Thank you. Of course, this belongs to my portfolio. And so I'm really proud of Peter McKinnon and all the girls that work in his department. I'm also very proud of the members on the Environment Committee who actually work really, really hard, and they're very supportive of the Green Living series. As you can see, that it has increased over the 4 years that it's been going, and I'm quite sure that we'll be coming up with more innovative ideas on how we can improve the environment in this city. I went to a garden. I'm now being taken to garden clubs over in the eastern suburbs, learning more and more, and we do have a Werribee Garden Club here, and I went on the website today to have a look at it, but it wasn't quite up to date. There are many, many things that we can do to improve our environment here in this city, and I'm really proud that I took this committee portfolio, because there's more and more people ring up all the time wanting to be on the Environment Committee. They know that we have a big challenge in front of us with the environment and the climate change and the waste and the litter. So therefore, I'm so proud that I took this on, and we will now be referring this back to the Environment and Sustainability Portfolio for further discussion on where we will take this Living Green, or the Green Living series. So thank you again to Peter, to the council staff, and to the committee members on the Environment Committee who work so hard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillors, any speakers for the motion? Councillor Hooper.
Look, I just wanted to make sure that the blokes aren't forgotten in this process. There's a lot of hard work that goes on behind the scenes, and I think that everyone contributes to this program in such an awesome way. Look, I remember well before getting on council, seeing the early days of this program rolling out, and I think that's where me and my wife got our green thumbs from, to be quite honest, because beforehand we were geeks and we had no interest of seeing plants go green. But through this program in particular, we thought we'd pop down and have a look, and to see the love and commitment that so many people within our community were putting together for the gardens, edible gardens front and back. That's something I never would have dreamed as a possibility, and chooks in an urban environment. That was just absolutely, well, for me it was like home, yeah, coming from the country. And for me, that really cemented part of why I fell in love with Wyndham. So thank you, everyone, for being on this journey and continuing it on. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Councillors, any further discussion?
I think it's well
all done and dusted? I thought it was a pretty foul statement, but anyway. Councillors, all those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. The next item on the agenda is the Wyndham Waste Education Tour 2018 final report. The report commences on page 193 with a recommendation on page 194. Attachments 206 to 227. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Barlow. Seconder. Too quick. Councillor Hooper. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first point is I want to congratulate yourself, the Director of City Operations in Stephen Thorpe, and the Manager of Waste Management and Disposal, Simon Clay, in a very comprehensive report, probably one that I'm sure the state government will be very interested in reading. And I just want to go back a little bit on the history in that. Last year, Mr Thorpe and I attended a meeting with the Upper House member Caesar Mellom, who put the 6 Western Suburb councils together in a room, and we discussed the opportunities of going waste to energy. And I'm very happy to say that we've gone from that first meeting to an area where this council has once again taken the lead in actually doing a lot of the work for a number of organisations, including the state government and private enterprises, who are looking at things like this. But basically, that's what they're still doing. They're looking in the mirror and not actually doing something. And the report of the number of organisations that you went and saw and what can happen, I think is absolutely critical. We're all well aware, and it's been documented quite clearly in the public arena, as to the delays of commencing the new cell at the Werribee refuse disposal facility down in West Road, and the heartache that's going to cause not only the people of Wyndham, but also the many other councils who won't be able to continue tipping down there if we don't have the airspace to be able to take their rubbish. And that will affect, of course, our bottom line, which we've been using a lot of money from that particular facility to help fund a whole range of other projects for this council over a number of years, and it's heartbreaking in that respect. However, this now gives everybody another option, an option of taking your waste. And I can't remember the page, Mr Mayor, but you might be able to tell me. It states quite clearly that we're up to 20 years behind Europe and other places around the world in this type of technology. Now, I know we were probably one of the last Western countries in the world to actually introduce mobile phones. We were a little bit late in the 50s in introducing television after it had occurred in a number of places. So in some cases, Australia tends to follow other countries. And even though the report states quite clearly that we may be 20 years behind the times in this, we're actually ahead of the game, I believe, here in Victoria. I think there are two, and again, I stand to be corrected, but I believe there are 2 such facilities currently being built, and one may already be open in the Premier's electorate in Western Australia. In July. So it'll be open sometime this month. And so Western Australia are moving quite quickly down this path, and I think that it's incumbent on the City of Wyndham as having the only public dumping facility in Victoria, I must stand to be corrected, or Metropolitan Melbourne.
Refuse disposal facility.
Refuse disposal facility in Metropolitan Melbourne. And I think that the fact that we've taken the lead on this, because the other disposal facilities, which are privately owned, don't look as if they're interested at this stage in actually building such a facility. And if we can do that, we're going to save a massive amount of airspace. I think up to about 80% of airspace. And with that, it means we'll extend the life of our facility down there in West Road later on. So as I started, I'm going to finish. Congratulations on the 3 of you in going overseas, doing your homework, and coming back with this report. And we can only hope that others can see the need for this, and it should be built in Wyndham.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillors, are there any speakers against this motion? Any further speakers for it? Councillor.
Your hand went up first. You can go.
Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. This particular tour, and indeed the investment in this space, is something that will be critical over the coming years, particularly when we see some of the strategic risks that this site has as opposed to the Latrobe Valley, which the Victorian government seems to be taking quite a keen interest in. And if a waste to energy facility is built down in the Latrobe Valley instead of in Wyndham, This will have significant long-term ramifications on our budget bottom line, and it is exactly why the investment that has been made in this tour has been so necessary to prove from a policy and an investment perspective that we are ready and we are keen to build a waste-to-energy facility out there at the RDF and in any other proposal that may come to us. And it is important to really, in my view, from an organisation perspective, elevate this even higher around the Clean Energy Corporation, seeing how we can get co-investment from other tiers of government to really build this. And as I have said privately, internally in council, and is indeed my public view as well, the reliance on the profits from the RDF are not going to be there forever, and we do need to segregate those profits from reinvestment into capital works in order to fund or indeed provide a capital upfront payment to deliver a waste-to-energy facility, if that's what is needed for us to get this bid. Because this bid will create jobs, it will deliver the local economy of the future, it will deliver the investment that we need in a site that, as Councillor Barlow has pointed out, is well behind in comparison to the rest of the developed world. But it also gives us an advantage because we are in this space where other particular councils are not, and as has been pointed out, if they are, they're in the private sector, and such a capital investment for a waste-to-energy plant would see companies like Cleanaway be less interested as opposed to a government government approach to a facility out here in Wyndham. So it is good to hear Councillor Barlow and the Mayor have been working with Caesar Mellon and the Victorian Government to try and get this here. I hope they deliver it in the West. We know there is a paper saying they need to build it in the West and we need it here. And we need to make sure it doesn't go to the Latrobe Valley. And that is why this was an absolute worthwhile investment. And indeed, the local knowledge that you will now bring for us to advocate for this is going to be very important in the coming months and years as this decision is made. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, any further speakers for the motion? Councillor Marcus.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to thank you and the council officers who went on this tour to bring back all this information to us. It's vitally important, and yes, we are often way behind. Australia is way behind other countries overseas, so let's hope we can catch up. Going back years ago, when we had all our waste coming from the shops, we did have a beautiful burner at Bourbon Road where every Saturday we would go out, back up there, tip out our cardboard, because in those days everything came by rail and it was cardboard and tissue paper for the clothing and the footwear people. So we've really gone backwards and we've created this monster, as my beautiful students were going to say in Parliament today, about the monster that we've created. It is our problem, but you know, hopefully we can. East Gippsland will be a challenge because we've got Darren Chester down there working very solidly. But one other thing we should have in our favour is Josh Frydenberg is the Minister for the Environment and he lives here in Victoria. So I think we should be going to his office a little more to make sure that he will, if there's money to come forward, he puts it here into our city. But what I think we have to do in the meantime, it's education, education and education, because people don't seem to want to recycle. I know that I'll keep going on. This is a great night for the environment portfolio. We have had residents in. We have showed them how to recycle. My rubbish is down to one small supermarket bag, and now I won't have any more of those, which is, by the way, but it is education. We have to make sure that we're working with all residents to make sure that we lessen the waste and litter that we have. I think Japan is another good example. Only 1% of their waste goes to landfill. So this is what we've got to do here. And I believe with all of the wonderful residents that live out here, we can do it. We just need to bring them on board and say no more to waste and litter. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillors, any further discussion? Councillor Khan, I assume you're speaking for it.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Look, I'll have to say that I think this is significant assets for the council, worth about $300 million in value. and also produces every year or makes us $15 million, which is more than $1 million per month, the revenue, which we use for the capital work. So it's important now we sort of adopt, and also we can't go the way we're going. We need to match the international standards. As many councils have said that we're behind. So obviously though, if the waste to energy will come, it will create some more opportunities, and a lot of people will think, you know, what we're doing now, we actually throw 500 tons of residual in our council, and its RDF is being a great facility for a number of the businesses, because somehow you have to throw the rubbish anyway. We've been very great to the rest of the Melbourne because we're taking the rubbish in our backyard. But of course, there's concerns for many people in the city and outside, because the tip is going bigger and bigger. So there have to be some solutions on how we can reduce the size and use effective this rubbish and make waste to energy. I think this is a really great tool because it have outcome and it's got a potential. So whatever the money we spend it on the tool, it's worthwhile. And I would say we should take more for the tools like this, because it's just something we should do. And I'm glad that council is now looking forward and trying to implement a new technology, which is just gonna make it more efficient for the council, but also going to help the waste to energy, which is what we should be working on. So it's a great initiative, and we should do more education tools like this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillor, any further discussion for the motion? None? Councillors, with your indulgence, I might just say something from the chair. Certainly the experience of meeting with people in this industry face to face was absolutely invaluable. And nothing can actually compare to being able to see, hear and smell what goes on. Certainly you can look at things on the internet, but you actually have to be there to see what people are doing, how they're doing it. And I have to say that I was absolutely astounded by what I saw in many of the plants. It's particularly beneficial not only to meet with technical experts as we did, and certainly that may have gone over my head a little, but with our director Simon, with our director Stephen Thorpe, and our refuge facility director manager Simon Clay, they were right across it, and I know that they did learn a lot. It certainly taught us about, or we learnt about the investment that's required to move away from landfilling and the various challenges that come from different technologies. And I have to say that whilst I can't remember what the conversions were, but they were anywhere upwards of £250 million. So in the vicinity, you know, of $500–600 million, but I think money well spent. What I learned from the experience is that we need leadership from higher levels of government when it comes to overall policy direction in this space, and that was certainly the case from the European Union. And given that we are home to a major waste disposal facility, we have a role to play in advocating for change. And since we have returned from the tour, we have already had meetings with Shadow Minister for Environment, Nick Wakeling, Caesar Malham, who sits on the State Government Environment and Planning Committee, and recently when we were in Canberra, Josh Frydenberg, the Federal Minister for Environment, which is certainly a great start. And I did today, with some other Western Region councillors, met with the State Environment Minister and Minister for Suburbs, Lily D'Ambrosio, and most certainly reiterated the fact that we've been, or where we've been, and the information we've brought back, and how eager we are to chat with our state government. So I certainly look forward to working with my fellow councillors, councillor officers, and anyone who is willing to come on the journey with us. So thank you very much for allowing me that opportunity to speak. So councillors, being no further discussion, I put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 6.5.3, Assembly of Councillors. The report commences on page 228 with a recommendation on page 228. Attachments 229 to 230. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Hooper. Seconder, Councillor Gibbons. Discussion, councillors? No discussion. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 7, notices of motion. 7.1, notice of motions 576, advocating against government cuts to the status resolution support service program. The report commences on page 231 with a recommendation, yes, on 232. Councillor Barlow, you being the mover of this notice of motion, would you like to speak to this, please?
Do we need a seconder at the moment?
Well, would you like to move it?
I will move it as it's read, and I'm happy to talk to it.
And a seconder, Councillor Hooper. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I only became aware of this probably about a week or so ago. I had a cultural diversity portfolio meeting, and I was given a document that explains the following: that in May of this year, the federal government implemented changes to the Status Resolution Support Service, or better known as the SRSS program, that would adversely impact some of our most vulnerable residents. Let me explain briefly what that means. It means the primary people affected are those whose applications for asylum in Australia has yet to be decided by the government. Typically, these people must wait years for a decision on their asylum application. In the meantime, shifting legal rules and requirements means that they have limited access to services that ordinary Australians take for granted. In fact, the support service provides a basic living allowance, typically 89% of a New Start allowance, which we all know New Start is a very low base to come from, and they get 89% of it, which equates to $247 a week. Casework, it also provides casework support and access to torture and trauma counselling for those seeking refuge in Australia. It's understood that here in Wyndham, we have some 300 individuals from asylum seeker backgrounds, which will be reassessed by the government. Those in receipt of the SRSS have been without working rights in Australia for several years, so they're not allowed to work, and consequently become de-skilled and will now be considered job ready and forced to search for employment with limited assistance. So let me just clarify that. They're on $247 a week. They're told now that they must go out and look for a job, but they're not given any money to pay for bus fares, train fares, food, rental, clothing. If they get a job and they're told you have to go and buy some tools, they won't have the money to go and buy the tools, so therefore they won't get the job. Among Victorian councils, Greater Dandenong has publicly declared its opposition to these changes, and others are considering similar moves. In the past 5 years, we have consistently signalled our support for refugees and asylum seekers through our public declarations and programs. In fact, it was back in 2012, during the reign or the term of Councillor Kim McElhaney, then Wyndham's Mayor, who explained at the time, refugees often have a long and traumatic journey before they arrive in Australia. We hope that by signing this declaration, we can help them feel more settled in our community. So councillors, members of the public, council officers, I ask you to support this motion so that we can write to the federal government explaining our distaste of this new cost-cutting exercise. And in fact, these people now, if this occurs, are actually far worse off than any homeless person that actually lives in our municipality, because they don't have any opportunity of actually having any finance. Those of them that do live with people will be relying on those people to support them during this time. But if they happen to be in a shared accommodation with other asylum seekers, where they're sharing the rent and sharing the food and sharing the utilities, between them, they won't have a dollar to pay for any of that. And I think that that's deplorable, absolutely deplorable, and goes against everything that this country signed up for in the Declaration of Human Rights with the United Nations. And in my view, the federal government should stand condemned.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillors, any speakers against this motion? Any further speakers for it? Councillor? Oh, I actually get to say who beat who, so you go first.
Look, I don't need to refer to any notes here. This is something that I'm absolutely proud to support, Henry. If society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable, and to turn around and kick people into the gutter that we have taken on board and assessing whether or not they deserve to be protected forever or not, while they're here, they deserve the rights and responsibilities that this community can give them and our government can give them. To give them an opportunity to thrive and not just survive in our community, to be able to find jobs, to be able to feed their kids, to be able to feed themselves. And to see this action go forward, where people can't even pay, $250 a week. How can you pay rent? How can you pay for food? How can you pay for a car? How the hell are you going to have a chance to do anything? Now, I cannot believe that our government would look at this as a serious way forward. It just goes beyond the pale. These people need the chance to be able to be meaningful members of our society, and to just kick them in the gutter, like I just said. How are they going to do that? What are they going to do? It's just, I cannot believe that our own government is going down this path. And I'm going to echo Henry's words on this. It's absolutely deplorable, and they should be condemned.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Seeing there's no speakers against, further speakers, Councillor Villar-Gonzalo? Four, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support this motion, and I echo the comments of Councillor Barlow and Councillor Hooper. I have personal experience with this issue. When the asylum seekers started coming in from Christmas Island and the other detention centers, I, as president of the Migrant Hub, started the accommodation facility, and we ended up having to lease properties and borrow money in order to provide beds and furniture into these houses. We ended up increasing the number of houses up to 25 houses, and at no government support, no funding from government, we were able to provide short-term accommodation to more than 1,000 asylum seekers. Many of them are still here in Windham, and we are still currently supporting 4 families, 4 asylum seeker, or those with asylum seeker background. So they're still in our houses. And I know for a fact that they are hard up. They are finding it hard. They have problems with their English, the language, right? They're not able to speak that, and they have their skills are not recognized. And as I echo what Councillor Barlow was saying, that they're having problems finding jobs, and they're dependent on this support from government. And if that's going to be removed, they are going to have big problems. And these are problems that we as a community need to be aware of. And that's the problem here, that government or state government and federal government sometimes are not providing the support, but we in the local community have to carry this burden. And so I support this motion and hope that the federal government will stop this removal or reduction of the support of the SRSS. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Villar-Gonzalo. Councillors, any further discussion? Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I certainly congratulate Councillor Barlow for putting this up, and we're seeing a very consistent theme by a very conservative federal government, and that is to attack the migrant community in this city. It wasn't too long ago that we endorsed a position in relation to citizenship, which was a very retrograde step to once again restrict people to become Australian citizens, with significant requirements being placed on them that weren't otherwise existent prior to the election of a Conservative government. We've seen them hike fees in relation to citizenship ceremonies. I know Councillor Barlow has been a strong advocate in this space. And then, of course, now we're talking on the resolution in terms of cutting income support for people once again, the most vulnerable parts of our community, once again linked to a federal government that clearly is taking a step that really is to attack people in this city that are from a migrant or refugee background. And I think we need to be very consistent, very resolute on these types of attacks by simply saying that we don't support it in any way, shape or form. We support the an equal right and opportunity and access because that impacts on service delivery, it impacts on making sure that people have access to education, it impacts on the services that we should all have no matter who we are or where we come from. And so well done, Councillor Bowen. I know as a colleague where you sit on the MAV Multicultural Committee, will continue to advocate for this on a state-wide basis. I'm sure you will with other local councils, but this is a very good notice of motion, so I support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gillian. Councillors, any further discussion? Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I have to say that I think and congratulate Henry Barlett to putting such a great notice of motion. People, those are seeking asylum in Australia, obviously they have some reasons to come to the country. They've already been here, they have the loved ones left in the homes and they've been forced or somehow they have no choice to leave the country. So it's already been in a situation where they haven't got any support and haven't got financial support. Even in fact, I received last week some phone calls from the guy called Abdul Malik saying there's people from South African country looking for a house. And I asked first question, what status they are on. He said they're refugee. I said, so they should be getting money. And the guy said to me, no, they're not receiving money yet because it's processing taking longer. So even though when they come here, even the departments takes a longer process, and that could be really a burden on the community. Now, this local resident of Wyndham doing a great service to the community and hosting them here in a Hopper Crossing. Also, I think it's a great way of letting know Mr. Peter Dutton, the Home Affairs Minister, and the Prime Minister write a letter to the Prime Minister saying that, as a city of Great Wyndham City is now writing a letter and saying that, we're behind those people who genuinely seek a support. And I could not be more agree than saying that, $247 a week is very difficult to live on. And then going for job interviews. And quite often these asylum seekers do not have much to offer because the country they come from, the standards are different, and the way they work in their countries is different than the way we work here. For example, in doing agriculture work, we're doing in their countries and electrical work or plumbing work or carpentry work or a tiling work. So they have to go through some further training, and if they haven't got a local experience, I think, Mr. Mayor, that we're not going to get a job. So it's very difficult if they do not receive financial support and also, though, moral support. But I'll echo my fellow councillors, the notice of motion, which is one of the good things I think we're supporting and advocating for the right cause. We couldn't support more than that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillors, any further discussion? Councillors.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, can I just clarify something? Just briefly, I did fail to thank the council officers from who I work with in the cultural diversity portfolio for their assistance in drafting this. So if Jenny could take that back to them, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillors, I'll now put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried.
Thanks, everyone.
Item 8, Council Seal 8.1, awarding of contract C1937/18 conservative maintenance services. The report commences on page 234, the recommendation on page 235. Councillors, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Khan. A seconder, Councillor Gibbons. Discussion, councillors? No discussion, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 9, contract summary. There is nil. Item 10, questions with notice from the public gallery. Madam CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We do have a number of questions this evening, and I'll start with a question from Arnav Sati. Is Arnav in the gallery? Hi, Arnav, thank you. And I do note, Mr Mayor, these are similar questions to those which were asked by the same submitter at the last meeting as well. So they will again be asked, but also a written response as per our last meeting will be provided. So if I may, Mr Mayor, the first question relates to, out of the total revenue collected by issuing parking infringements in the last 3 years, so over 2009-21 at Tarneet train station and over 985 at Williams Landing train station, how much money and what percentage of money is actually used to solve the parking crisis? So I will refer that question through to our Acting Director, Livability Innovation, Mr Peter McKinnon. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam CEO, and thank you for the question. And as we've stated previously, the provision of car parking at congested train stations is primarily a state government matter, but we remain active in our advocacy platform to the state on this issue. Money collected from fines is used to contribute to and assist in fulfilling the numerous and diverse functions that a modern-day local government organisation must deliver. Many of these functions relate directly to transport, the easing of congestion and improving traffic safety. Of particular note, and as part of its integrated plan and budget, Wyndham City has allocated $37 million this financial year as part of its capital program to upgrading our road and path networks. This infrastructure delivery piece needs to go hand in hand with our continuing advocacy and strategic work. We are currently in the process of formulating a wider rail advocacy position paper for all levels of government, which will take into account train capacity, signalisation, new stations, alignment with bus networks and commuter parking. This work will be developed in parallel with the new activity centres framework to ensure future solutions are integrated into our new town centres to ensure functionality and high quality urban design outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I think it's important to add, as per the response provided to a similar question at the last Ordinary Council meeting, that the issuing of fines, parking infringements specifically at these sites relates to the maintenance of community safety and ensuring appropriate levels of provision are applied where you've got large numbers of residents parking in these locations. So the infringements relate to illegal parking and need to be continued to ensure broader community safety is maintained. And I think that was very clear, Arnav, in terms of the response provided at the last meeting also. Mr Mayor, another question regarding schools, and this one again very similar to the question at the last council meeting, relates to the provision of schools required or particularly required in Tarneet, Truganina and Williams Landing over the next 4 years. So the question asks what's currently being done and what's being planned in relation to the delivery of these schools by the state government. So that's part one, and part two relates to council's advocacy plan, and has council got required support from the state government to appropriately address this issue, and what schools are currently planned to be delivered in these suburbs and when? And is the community unfair in asking for more? So I think again, Mr Mayor, it's really pertinent to point out that this was a question asked at the previous OCM, which a detailed response was provided both verbally and also in writing, where we also highlighted this council's commitment to the schools campaign, which everyone I think who has had access to social media will have seen. So I will indulge, Mr Mayor, council in regard to a response to this question, albeit provided previously. So I will, Mr Mayor, direct that question through to our Director of City Life, Jenny McMahon.
Thank you, Madam CEO, and through you, Mr Mayor. Hi, Arnav. We're constantly in contact with the state government regarding the planning for schools right across Wyndham. We have a very strong advocacy plan in place, which has been activated through the Schools for Wyndham campaign. The state government has made some good progress with schools when it comes to the planning of building new schools, with 6 new schools in the pipeline, but we know that that the building of schools is certainly not keeping up with the demand across our city. And we know that we need more schools far more quickly than they're being built now. Details of which schools council believes we need and when and where is detailed in Council's advocacy strategy, which is freely available on Council's website. And we'll continue our strong advocacy work, and we would encourage you and others to join our Schools for Wyndham campaign.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now moving on, we have another series of questions from an Andrea Taylor. Is Andrea in the gallery this evening?
Andrea was here. The council's motion has triggered an emotive response, and unfortunately she's had to leave.
Okay, thank you. Given Andrea's not in the gallery this evening, we will actually provide a written response to her question, and we'll certainly get that to her shortly. So thank you for that advice. So moving on, Mr. Mayor, we do have some further questions, some of which are very detailed, so I won't be reading them out in detail purely because they do relate very specifically to a planning matter that Council has already considered this evening. And I understand that a number of these points have already been raised in a submission. So I will go into some detail, but I just need to check that Mr. Peter Colin French is in the gallery. Thank you very much for attending this evening. So the first question relates to planning application 10296/17. And the question asks, are the councillors, the mayor and the CEO of Wyndham City Council aware that the report that the development relies upon to justify the shortfall in car parking for the development acceptability of traffic, that is the TTM engineering report, appears to have glaring factual errors in it? The question goes into some detail regarding claims 24 to 28 in the report around car spaces being made available on Cowan Parkway. And there's some a suggestion that when in fact the street's only 6.0 metres wide curb to curb and can only accommodate legal parking for 13 cars on the straight part of the street and a maximum of 2 at the total end 15, and the general statement made in section 4.4 of the report to justify a waiver for the development car parking shortfall is simply untrue. So that's the detail pertaining to that particular question. It also goes into some detail about the size of the cul-de-sac, and I understand these have been provided as responses formally as part of your objection to the planning application, so they were considered by officers, which is why I'm not going to read them verbatim this evening. But suffice to say, there are a number of concerns regarding those particular claims in the report. So I will now ask Mr. Mayor, Stephen Thorpe, our Director of City Operations, to respond specifically to those questions, and also just confirm for my benefit also, Mr. Thorpe, that we have addressed those matters as part of the consideration by officers, albeit not to the liking of the objector, but certainly that those things had actually been considered as part of that report. Thank you.
So thank you, Madam CEO, through you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you for the questions, Mr. French. I might join them together in a response. I note that many, if not all, of the issues that you've raised were raised at the planning forum, and as our CEO said, they were also in a submission that was received by our planning officers. They were considered as part of the report that was received by council and by the planning officer in making their recommendation. And I think, as you would have heard tonight in the debate amongst our councillors on this matter, that as a responsible authority, the council is required to make a decision in the light of the Wyndham planning scheme. So these issues and concerns that you've raised have been considered in forming a view and making a recommendation to council, and then obviously by council in making a decision tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to ensure that we've addressed the other question through you, Mr. Thorpe, I will get you to answer the second part. I will just quickly read that out, though, just ahead of time. And that is, again, in relation to planning application 10296/17. Are the councillors, the mayor and the CEO of Wyndham City Council aware that the development has been objected to or rejected by at least 31 adults representing all but one household in the street, street, and that all properties backing onto the development and fails in many critical areas of the Clause 55 town assessment, and that the assessment by the Songbowden Town Planning is inaccurate or simply incorrect. The development fails the following clauses. So I will read out those clauses without the narrative. So clause B, which is around the lack of congruency with streetscape. Clause B2, regarding overcrowding in primary schools locally. Clause B4, that relates to failure to consider limited aspects of infrastructure. Clause B5 rather, that does not integrate with the street. So in other words, the development is not on the level ground. That there is also insufficient parking space and the street will probably be filled with many cars, that dwellings are all over 4-bedroom dwellings and provisions have not been made for the increase in street numbers and cars and therefore not considered. Clause B12, the development compromises safety. The street's narrow, car parks or cars are currently parked illegally, and that this will increase and they'll block access, and less room for children to ride bikes safely. Clause B13 does not allow, so the development does not allow the same space for trees and gardens as other houses and removed some existing trees. And the final one here, through you, Mr. Mayor, is regarding B4. And the development compromises access. So again, introduces more crossovers, therefore reduces parking in what are already limited or narrow streets. There's also more overleaf as well, and I will again just highlight these by clause just for completeness. Clause B15, again relating to the provision of parking and the increased population. Clause B17, compliance is suspected to be compromised regarding a retaining wall. Clause B18, compliance is questionable given the lack of consideration of the retaining wall again, or what's required in terms of retaining walls. Clause B22, overlooking. Clause B24, again, impacts have been grossly underestimated. Clause B31, the design of the block is inconsistent with the character. Clause B34, regarding lack of provision of effective bin space and so on. Now, Mr. Mayor, ordinarily we wouldn't read out such detailed questions. I think given the matters being considered by council tonight, it's important to just be clear to the objectors that it has been heard, both in terms of the objection itself as part of the town planning forum and the consideration by officers and thus the recommendation to council, but also that you have had the opportunity to raise these as public questions this evening. So I just need to be clear about that for the record, that we wouldn't normally be receiving questions that are so extensive. So, Mr. Mayor, if I could ask our Director, Mr. Stephen Thorpe, to now respond to that second question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam CEO. My apologies for joining the two questions together with my previous response. I mean, essentially, my response is the same. The number of objectors and the details of the objections that were made were included in the council report. All of the matters that have been raised were considered by the planning officer, informing a view on the application and providing their advice to council. And officers were satisfied that the requirements of the Wyndham planning scheme were met in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are no further questions this evening.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Councillors, item 11 on the agenda is Councillor Delegates' reports. Report commences on page 242 with recommendation on 243, and as historically done, we'll vote and then we'll speak after. I know that's not the normal, well, that's been the historical practice. I've just spoken to our governance coordinator and we are going to rectify that. So, having said that, can I have a mover for this report, please? Councillor John Gibbons, a seconder. Councillor Tony Hooper. I'll put it to the vote and then we'll speak. Councillors, all those in favour? Against, the motion is carried. Now, with indulge, councillors, does any councillors who has a report, a delegate's report, wish to speak, or just taken as being read in the report? No? Everybody's happy? Okay, moving right along. Thank you very much. We already did that. It's all right. So good. Are you for or against it?
I'll be for this time.
Okay, cool. Good.
This time.
Okay, item 12, urgent business, there is nil. Item 13, confidential business. Councillor Barlow, you're moving.
Mr Mayor, that pursuant to section 89-2 of the Local Government Act 1989, standing orders be suspended and this meeting of council be closed to members of the public in order for council to discuss
Mr Mayor, given
that the recommendations of the closed meeting of council with regard to confidential matters be adopted.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Seconder, please, Councillor Gibbons. Discussion, councillors? All, there are none. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. I now close the meeting at 9:10.